From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Inspired Intentions listeners, Alan here again today for you on this lovely Monday, and we have an episode all about breathwork for you today. Breathwork can be a big umbrella, and it can be helpful for a lot of things, and we're going to talk about how breathwork can be helpful and all the internal things that it can help you with, things like anxiety. And I have a new Skyterra employee and guest on the Inspired Intentions podcast here to talk all about it. Clare Ellinger, right? Got it right?
That's right. You got it right.
Nailed it. Clare is our program director here. And Clare, you're a bit of a breathwork expert, so I hear.
Well, thank you. That's quite a flattering term to use. I don't know about expert, but I am very passionate about breath work, and it's something that's really been a lifesaver in my own life. And I always just feel so grateful and honored to get to discuss it with other people and get to share the power and the benefits of incorporating breath work in your life. So I'm excited to be on here today.
Well, I'm going to stick with expert from what I've heard from our guests over your past time here, and from just looking over all of our notes here and what you and I just talked about breath work. I'm like, you know what you're talking about. I think that's really awesome. So
that's very kind.
Clare, why don't you give our listeners a bit of perspective on you and how you became such a breathwork expert, how it became such a passion for you?
Sure. Well, I think even at a really young age, I've always been drawn to movement, and movement has always been a really healing outlet for me and has always connected me to creativity. And I think also given me a space just for adventure and for exploration, which have always been qualities that have felt more natural to me. So as a young child, I think around 3, I started with gymnastics. And I loved the creative aspect of that and how you could use your body as an instrument of strength and power and force. But it was also just a really beautiful form of movement, which I always thought was so fascinating that it could balance the two. But then I also decided to explore ballet, and that even more held like the beauty and the grace aspect of movement, which I thought was just so mesmerizing. And at the same time, the gymnastics came more naturally to me because I've always been just more muscular in my stature and was always just a little bit more into like functional movement naturally. But I loved the challenge of having to like slow down and soften my lines of my body and really lean into the grace side of movement. And so I was doing both for a while, but then it came to a crossroad where I had to pick between the two, which was really heartbreaking in a way because I loved both.
Yeah.
But if you're familiar with either, with any sport, I'm sure, any competitive sport or anything that you can really dive into, both just started to require more and more time and energy and also finances and all of the different things. So I just ultimately was forced to choose, and I went with ballet. And I think that was partly because I had a friend group in that environment, and then also partly because I was drawn to the challenge of it, and I loved the discipline of ballet as well. So then years down the road, the discipline of it and the intensity of the environment actually ended up to develop some trauma for me. Unfortunately, as I think happens a lot in the ballet world, a lot of it is very focused on the body and perfection. And it can just be, unfortunately, a really crucial environment where just really unrealistic pressure is placed on the girls. And then I think because of that, a lot of competition is kind of born among the girls. So it can just become very unhealthy and also require even more effort and energy and time as it progresses and level. So it was 7 days a week for hours a day usually, and all of the different experiences that most children get to have, like going trick-or-treating was never a given. Like there were many things that I felt like I had to miss because of ballet, which at times like felt kind of beautiful to be so committed to something that you would give everything up to continue with that. But then I also reached a breaking point, I think more because of the emotional draining of the environment and just the continued unrealistic standards and pressures. And I mean, it was to the point where like we would sometimes have point shoes thrown at us or would have a ruler slapped at our stomach if our stomach was poking out. So just like really intense things. And it just really began to wear on me. And I developed a unhealthy relationship with my body, but also with movement as a whole, because I
Mm-hmm.
just began to associate like the pain and the trauma and the grief of kind of losing something that I once loved and held so dear to the intensity of it all. So, because of that, I eventually just walked away from ballet completely and then from movement completely for a time period. And this was in high school now at this point. But because so much of my world and so much of my heart and soul had been wrapped up in ballet and movement for my whole life, I really lost sight of myself and lost my identity for a while. And I lost all of my friends because once you walk away from that world, it's kind of like you're not a part of it anymore. And
Sure.
part of that is just logistics because it is 7 days a week and many hours. And then
Mm-hmm.
I think also because it kind of feels like you're walking away from your family because you're so close when you're in that environment together. And when you quit, it almost feels like you're quitting on the people that are still in it
Yeah.
too. And so in high school, I started being a little bit rebellious and started making some poor decisions and got involved with a group of people that were also in kind of a dark place in different ways. And I think also in their own ways had all kind of lost sight of their true identities. And so we were all just like seeking happiness and seeking finding ourselves, but through the wrong pathways. And through that season, I fell in love with someone that was also in that state of darkness. And unfortunately, he passed away from an overdose a couple years later.
Mm.
And we had broken up at the time, but I had always held so much love for him and had always felt like it was such a huge part of me because of just how transitional that time period was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd always hoped that at some point he would get back on his feet and we would end up back together, even though I think a part of me always knew that it was very likely that it could take a tragic turn. And when he passed, I was in a state of denial, I think, for a while. And I also had convinced myself this narrative that because I had done some healing work at that point and had kind of walked away from all of the quote unquote poor decisions and had started working out again with my dad and was like, they started calling me Gammy, my family, because I started just not doing anything
Mm.
like rebellious or anything that I would consider bad.
Yeah.
I just took like a totally different direction and was trying to just walk the straight and narrow and just be as good as I could possibly be, which I know now looking back is not the right mindset either. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that because of that hope and also that fear that eventually it would take that direction, when it did, it's just like a part of my world and myself came crashing down as well. And then I also didn't have the tools to be able to navigate that, as I think most people don't at that age have the tools to be able to navigate a significant loss. And I'm not sure if we can ever like be fully prepared for an earth-shattering loss or life
I
event,
don't think so.
but I definitely didn't have the tools and the resources to even be somewhat prepared to navigate that or to
Mm-hmm.
face the grief that I can look back and know what was really going on. So I started really pouring into the gym and working out because it at least provided me somewhat of a relief when I was in there, and I would just be in the gym for hours and started working out really intensely, like doing heavy weight training and doing a lot of high intensity cardio. And again, all of it was like a temporary release.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it served a purpose because it gave me a space to somewhat process and to be able to at least temper some of those emotions that felt so unstable at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I still was suffering from really extreme anxiety that eventually turned into panic attacks. And when I look back, I really feel like a lot of the anxiety was just grief that I had stored that I couldn't process, that was having to find an outlet to escape my body because it was just insurmountable.
Mm-hmm.
But it was coming out as anxiety and panic attacks that would make me feel like I couldn't breathe and like I was having a heart attack. And I was living with my parents at the time, and it was to the extent where I would like go running into their room at night and be like, I swear I'm having a heart attack. Like my heart is racing so uncontrollably. And they were
Wow.
concerned too. Like we had to get an EKG done and different tests
Yeah.
and things. And I also developed really severe headaches. So there was just a lot of signals that my body was giving me that something was going on and that it really needed a resolution or it needed some help. And eventually I just reached a breaking point with the working out as well because my hormones went crazy and all of my hormones started ultimately shutting down, I think because I was just burning my body and my mind out with
Mhm.
that intense training.
Yeah.
So I developed hypothyroidism, which is low functioning thyroid, and like all of my estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, like every hormone was like very minimally functioning.
Mm.
And because of the headaches, they did an MRI on my brain and found out I had a growth on my pituitary gland when our pituitary gland regulates a lot of our hormone functioning.
Wow.
So all of my hormones were just in the wrong place, like cortisol and everything. And I think that that paired with continuing to try to pursue the intense movement and working out, just my whole body just started to shut down. I was very fatigued. I started to put on a lot of weight, even though my diet was very rigid and I was still trying to train for hours a day. And this whole time, I'm still having the panic attacks and still just feeling very uncontrolled and unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really out of desperation that I wandered into a yoga studio one day. And it was a studio that I had learned about from a friend of my mom's who says now that she was on a yoga high and that she was just like rambling about yoga at the gym one day to my
Yeah.
mom and was like, oh, if Claire's having anxiety, she should go try this studio. Like the teacher's amazing. And so I did, just really out of desperation. I never would have thought it would have actually done anything for me, but
Yeah.
maybe deep down, like my intuition and spirit knew I needed to be there. And it's funny when I look back because I know now that the studio was a closed studio where the classes with this particular teacher, who was the owner, were all full, and you had to be on a wait list to be able to attend her classes regularly. And she still allowed me to come in and practice that day. And I think she could probably feel for my energy and just from how uncomfortable and scared I was, honestly, when I walked in, that I needed to be there. So she was so nurturing from that very first day. And after the first practice, it was really uncomfortable for me because I was already having to look at some of the things that I was actually feeling. But I also could tell enough to know that I needed to keep going back there to that space and with that instructor. So I decided that it would just be like my recovery day on Fridays. And during the week, I was still working out very intensely and would just look forward to that Friday recovery day where I would go back to that studio and learn from Amy was her name, her wisdom, and would get to be in that just really healing environment. But over time, I developed more of a trust with that and with the studio and the practice of
Mm-hmm.
yoga, where I started craving more of it. And so, whenever she would have someone that couldn't come to a different class during the week, I would just take their spot. And then eventually she was like, why don't you just come Monday and Wednesday too? So I was going 3 days a week and it just expanded from there to where before I knew it, I was practicing yoga pretty much every day. And I think it was months down the road after consistent practice where I had an epiphany one day and realized that I wasn't having panic attacks anymore. And I didn't even realize that shift as it was happening. It's just like one day my eyes opened and I was like, oh my
Wow.
goodness, I don't have panic attacks anymore. What's happening? And then I started noticing that when my body started getting that elevated anxiety feeling that would eventually turn to panic attacks in the past, now my body was naturally dropping into a form of breathing called Ujjayi breathing, which is a yogic pranayama. And I was so fascinated by that because it wasn't something I intentionally did myself. I never would have believed someone if they would have told me that you could cure your panic attacks with breath work. I would have said they don't understand anxiety if they tried to tell me that and probably would have been really defensive about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't help but believe it when I experienced it personally that truly I was no longer having panic attacks. And I'm sure we'll get to this later on in our conversation, but I can go ahead and say that still to this day, many years later now, I haven't had another panic attack since incorporating regular breath work.
Wow.
And so that really intrigued me about the breath. And I started diving into other forms of breathing more through those yoga classes and was connecting more dots as to ways that I could use breath work to enhance how I was feeling or shift how I was feeling
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the different aspects of ourselves. And so through that curiosity, I wanted to just fully dive into yoga and decided to do my yoga teacher training with that same instructor. And we did a lot of breath work within that training. And I learned a lot about breath work through that training. And over time, it just continued to totally transform and heal and up level my life. And so now at this point, like I just can't help but share it with other people because it would feel greedy almost to share that
Mm.
wisdom for myself.
Yeah.
So I always feel so excited about any opportunity to hopefully help people through tapping into the power of their own breath.
It's quite the path that you've taken to get to where you're at today.
It's definitely been a journey.
And, I can't help but think, like, what if Amy would have turned you away that day?
That's a
You,
really beautiful question.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm so grateful for her. I'll always hold her so dear in my heart because I can tell like her connection to people when I look back and can see that she knew that I needed to be there and welcomed me with open arms. And I think it's a really beautiful gift for someone to have, to know what people need and to be able to nurture them in that way. And to do it so gently. Like she never told me that day that the class was full. She never even told me that at all. It's just through being a part of the studio where I learned that. So she's amazing.
Have you thought that maybe you're kind of the Amy for some people here at Skyterra?
Oh, that's so honoring. Well, that would be the greatest gift for me to even be able to be half the person that she is,
Mm.
because I just look up to her so much and consider her to be such a wise mentor and such a gift to the world. So if I could serve that same type of role for someone, that would be truly the greatest honor for me.
Well, I think you are, and that kind of leads me to my next question. What you're teaching, about your journey and what's led you to your practices in yoga and breath work. You're teaching that to our guests, and I guess what is it that you're seeing in our guests that made you realize that this could work for them as well? Because I've heard it from them that
Hmm.
you're helping people through this practice, and that's what I've
Thank
kind of meant
you.
by that statement. And,
Yeah.
what are you seeing in our guests?
Thank you. Well, that makes me so happy and
Yeah,
so grateful to hear. I think that all of our guests come to us with something, as we all have something, whether it's anxiety or
sure.
depression. A lot of our guests have been through their own tumultuous journey where they've had to navigate a difficult loss or a difficult health condition or both, or other circumstances that can be just really debilitating for people. And I think it's incredible, first of all, that they're even here at this wellness retreat and that they have the intuition to know that they need to come somewhere like this for a respite or for a reset. And so I think that naturally our guests are just generally very receptive to
Mm-hmm.
healing techniques. And so through that, they'll sometimes share very openly with me about their own struggle with anxiety or their struggle with depression or grief or the other things that we can
Kind of
go
that,
through as humans.
yeah, that
Yeah,
umbrella we were talking about. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so they're usually pretty open to trying the more yogic side of things, including breath work and meditation. But specifically, the breath work is what I get to see and witness the most, and making
mm-hmm.
immediate shifts for people and having them also share the immediate shifts that they experience through even just a class that they take here at Skyterra. And then hopefully later on they'll update us, and sometimes we do have people
Mm-hmm.
that'll update us that their life is continuing to change, which is so incredible through the tools and the resources that they connect to here.
So I guess what I'm also hearing is that you're also seeing some of the things in our guests that you saw or found in
Mhm.
yourself over time
Yeah.
and through your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a quick example that was so moving to me is I was doing a private breathwork session with someone recently, and
Mm.
she immediately just started crying in a really healthy way. Like she was smiling and crying at the same time. And she was like, "This is so beautiful. I can't believe this. Like, I'm just having this release happen right now."
Mm.
And I think that she probably was in a similar state of storing a lot and having some emotions that needed to come out that hadn't yet.
Yeah.
And the breath work was serving as that doorway for her to be able to release some of them and see some of the emotions and tend to them in this gentle and nurturing way. So it was incredible to get to see that happen so quickly for her just within one session of connecting to her breath.
Is that common?
It can be. It's very common to have an emotional response sometimes when
Yeah.
you're utilizing breath work, and it can bring up any emotion. So it might
Mm.
also bring up anger or something that you have to feel and face first, and then in continuing with the practice, you'll feel it shift over time and release in a healthy way, or
Mm-hmm.
be transformed to a new emotion, whatever pathway it needs to take. I feel like it will kind of naturally take through the wisdom of the breath work and the wisdom of our own body.
Gotcha. So seeing and feeling what you may have seen or felt in yourself through the guests, and being able to give them that experience, whether it be through classes or privates or whatever. How are you using breath specifically? What techniques are you using to help with things like anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, some of our classes are naturally designed to incorporate more focused breath work.
Mm-hmm.
And examples of that would be Connect, which is our morning class. It's
Yeah.
a great foundation for the day. We always incorporate some type of breathing technique, and depending on who's teaching it, and even with myself teaching it, I change which breathing technique I do
Sure.
depending on the group and depending on the energy in the day
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And then I've also recently added a Connect and Awaken class, which is essentially a longer variation of Connect. So it allows more time and space for breath work and for the other elements of that class. And then something that I've noticed pretty quickly here that I think is really awesome is even our fitness classes incorporate an understanding and an emphasis of the breath, where other instructors and myself included are constantly reminding people to breathe in their
Mm-hmm.
exercises and to take deep breaths and nourishing breaths. And then at the end of the strength classes or cardio classes, usually we help to bring them back down through the breath as well. So I think
Yeah.
pretty much the majority of our classes include some element of it. And like I said, for myself personally, I change up the technique that I incorporate in all of those classes, really just depending on the needs that I see and feel from the guests, and also the specific things that they'll sometimes share openly at the beginning of the class.
What are some of the breath works, and specifically, because most of them have names, right? The
Yeah.
sequences have names that you're kind of using in, maybe like, for instance, in the Connect or Awaken class.
Yeah, good question. So one of the more simple forms of breathing that I incorporate a lot, it's called Dirga breath or three-part breath. And essentially you're breathing in from the very base of your spine, the pelvic floor region. You're following the inhale up each vertebrae, and it fills the lower abdominals, the midsection, and then the
Mm-hmm.
chest. And then you're releasing it back down just as mindfully. So you'll feel the heart fall first, and then the rib cage close, and then the belly become hollow. And that's a really good entry point, I feel like, for people, because it really is just basically deep breathing and you're just following the breath. So you're giving your mind an anchor as well, but it's very calming and can help you just to feel more grounded and present. So that's one that I use a lot, especially earlier in the week when people are probably a little bit newer to incorporating breath work.
Mm-hmm.
Another form of breathing that I love is alternate nostril breathing. And it's one that at first I think can come with a little bit of hesitancy because it seems kind of awkward. You're having
Mm-hmm.
to plug different nostrils and breathe in only through one side and then out through the other. But it's one that I've gotten to notice that people develop a trust with pretty quickly, because if they can try it even with just an inkling of an open mind, they're going to feel the benefits of it even after just a couple of minutes. And it's always really fun for me to get to see the shift in people and then to get to hear them say, like, oh, I actually loved that. And I do feel more balanced, or I feel more connected to all parts of myself, or whatever it is that they experience themselves. So that's one that I try to incorporate a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
I also like to do different variations of counting. So one of the more traditional forms is the box breathing,
Yeah.
where it's 4, 4, 4, 4. But one of my personal favorites is an inhale for 4 counts, and then pausing at the top of the inhale and retaining the breath for 2 counts, and then exhaling for 7. And having that extended exhale can be really grounding for people and can really help with anxiety. And it can also introduce them to breath retention, but very gently, because you're only retaining the breath for 2 counts. So I would say those are the ones that I incorporate the most often here.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many different forms
Sure.
of breathing techniques. So it's something that I think if people connect to, they can really dive into that whole world and have fun trying different forms of breathing and taking note of how they feel. So over time, they're kind of building a medicine cabinet of breathing techniques where no matter how they feel, they can reach in that cabinet and grab something that will help them.
It's a great analogy.
Thank
It's very
you.
visual. Is one of those particular ones one of your favorites?
Yeah, I would say the alternate nostril breathing is one of my
Gotcha.
favorites just because it really speaks to me. I think that it is so grounding, and usually grounding is what I'm seeking through the breath.
Mm-hmm.
I do also like a form of breathing called Kapalabhati, which I haven't mentioned yet. It's kind of like breath of fire, which is a little more commonly known, where you're breathing in and breathing out at a very rapid pace. And it feels almost like hyperventilating when you're learning it. But then once
Yeah.
you learn it, it feels so cleansing and energizing. But Kapalabhati is just an active exhale. So the inhale is still passive, but then you pump your diaphragm as you exhale, and that's
Mm-hmm.
more active. And it can feel like a beautiful balance, in my opinion, of grounding and cleansing. So, like, if I feel like I'm very overstimulated, I just will love to like get in downward dog or child's pose, something very grounding, and do that Kapalabhati breathing.
Gotcha. And are those breath works some of the breath works that you do when you work with folks one on one?
Yeah, so it's very individualized whenever I work one on one with people. Usually, I do have the honor of getting to hear a little bit about their story and their background and what it is that has brought them to Skyterra and also to Breathwork
Mm-hmm.
specifically. So, based on that, I kind of reach back in that medicine cabinet
Gotcha.
and grab the formula that I think will serve them the best.
Yeah.
And then we can also troubleshoot together. So, sometimes people might come to me and say, like, oh, I tried this form of breathing in a yoga class and it didn't really connect to me. What am I doing wrong? And so then I can help people figure out it's not that they're doing anything wrong, it's just that they may not be doing something that's like a small element of the breathing technique that can make a huge difference
Mm-hmm.
in how it feels and how it lands. So sometimes it's more of just learning the breathing techniques and nailing down the technique itself and understanding it better and allowing it to work more in their favor. So they're maximizing the benefits of whatever techniques we're exploring together.
Yeah, I think we breathe all the time, right? We should
Hmm.
just know how to breathe. You
Right.
can do a breathwork practice wrong or not have the full picture on one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that our breath is really kind of like untapped potential for a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, we are always breathing. But I think that for a lot of us, it takes either yoga or meditation or a teacher that can really connect us to the power of using our breath in our day to allow ourselves to feel better, but also to work through challenges that we face.
So when you spent some time with some guests, that's kind of what you're seeing as a result of these breathwork practices.
Yeah, I would say one of the most immediate things that I hear from people is just that feeling of calm that the breath can deliver.
Mm-hmm.
But as simple as it sounds, for some guests, that in of itself is pretty life changing because it may be the first time that they have felt calm in a long time
Mm,
or truly at peace with
sure.
themselves. So even just to be able to give them a few minutes in their day where they feel safe, calm, connected, that alone can be really powerful for guests. And it's something that they thankfully do share and experience pretty often. And sometimes it happens really naturally. Like I was teaching the daily mobility and balance class today, and we had a big group in there. There was like 17 guests that were taking the class, and they've all really connected this week, which is always so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, they were like very chatty and laughing during the class at the beginning part. And then when we came into Legs Up the Wall and I started just cueing some breath work without even trying to get anyone to quiet down or anything, naturally, the room went silent, everyone's eyes closed, they were all deep breathing, and I could feel the shift of energy and see how calm everyone got just through taking those deep, relaxing breaths. So sometimes it's a shift that they might not even know that they're moving into, if that makes
Right.
sense, but that I just get to witness, which is really cool.
And just over time, the practice makes perfect on it, and you do get to
Yeah.
see that shift.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that people can feel it even if they don't fully understand that it's
Mm,
the
yeah.
breath that's actually giving them those benefits right away.
Yeah. I like that. Well, I think it would be really interesting for you to do an example of a breath work on mic. Are
Sure,
you
I would be
down?
happy to. That
Okay.
sounds good.
Because, breath work is one of those things that you practice. Breath work is one of those things that you can do. But often we're not recording these on video. So sometimes, our
Yeah.
listeners can't see what a guest is talking about, a
Mm-hmm.
podcast guest. But
Right.
you guys should be able to hear this, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
I
I'll
th-
have to lean on you a little bit, Alan, if you don't mind doing the breath work with me,
yeah,
because I'll be cueing you through this specific breath pattern that I'm
sure.
feeling kind of drawn towards the most to share. And because I'll be talking through it, you will hear my breath minimally, but they'll be able to hear your breath more.
Okay, great. Just what everybody wants to hear, my breathing.
I'm sure.
All right. So which one do you want to do?
I think the alternate nostril breathing would be a
Understood.
fun one to share, just because I feel like, for one, it's very versatile because it just helps to bring people back to balance. And
Okay.
there's even been studies done on it that show that it can help to balance the left and right side of the brain if you're a believer of that
Yeah.
mindset. And overall, it can just help to balance the different energies that we all have. So no matter if you're overstimulated or understimulated or somewhere in between, it can just help your body find its state of harmony again.
Okay. So explain that particular breath work then to me. What do you mean by
Sure.
alternate nostril breathing?
Yeah, so I will give the forewarning that this can sometimes take an open mind for people, because you are going to be using your two-piece fingers, which is your pointer and your middle finger, placing those two fingers between the eyes, and then we'll be closing alternated nostrils with a free finger. So for
Okay.
most people, it makes the most sense to use your ring finger and your thumb to close and open each nostril, but you can use whatever makes the most sense to you and whatever feels the most natural. And I'll cue you through this in a moment, but essentially you just breathe in through one nostril while you plug the other nostril, switch at the top of the inhale, exhale through the second nostril, but then you breathe back in through that same side. So it's only the inhale where you switch over to the other nostril. So
Okay.
release the breath, breathe back in, switch at the top, exhale, so on and so forth.
Okay.
And you're breathing in and out through your nose. So if you are like very stuffy through your nose or congested, it may not be the best one to do unless you can still get the full breath with a stuffy nose. But if you feel like you're struggling to breathe in and out through your nose, since you're only relying on one nostril, maybe one to revisit when you have more open pathways.
Gotcha. We'll pull the mics back just a little bit so I can get my hand in here. But essentially, you're basically taking your pointer finger and your middle finger, putting it like your fingerprint, where your fingerprint would be, in between your eyebrows.
Exactly.
And that gets your thumb and your ring finger kind of level with your nostrils.
You
And
got it.
what Claire's describing is kind of just shifting back and forth using, your fingerprint area from your pointer finger and your middle finger as like a pivot point, and just moving your fingers back and forth to basically just close or open one nostril or the other.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And
Sounds like
you're
you've got it.
not a lot of pressure on your nose. You're not
Right.
you're just enough to kind of close one side or the other with that thumb or middle finger.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's also a good way where you can start with it if it feels too challenging to close one nostril all the way and breathe in solely through one side. Maybe at first you just halfway close it. So you're practicing relying like 50% on that nostril and then a little bit more on the other,
Okay.
whatever
Yeah.
helps you the most as an entry point.
Okay. Well, I'm feeling pretty clear today, so I think we'll do it. I'm going to pull my mic back just a little bit, and let you kind of lead me through it. I'm going to put my pointer finger and middle finger right in between my eyes.
Yeah,
I've got
that's right.
my ring finger and my thumb ready. All right.
All right, so before we start closing either nostril, I'm just going to encourage everyone to close their eyes and just give yourself a moment to settle into your space. The more relaxed you can be going into breath work, the more effective it can be. But of course, part of the purpose is to relax our body and mind, so there's no pressure here. Just take a few natural breaths to connect to the power of your own breath right away, and to open yourself to tapping more fully into that power through even just this brief moment of alternate nostril breathing. Now let's take a deep cleansing breath to prepare. Breathe in through your nose. Try to let your lungs fully expand. Exhale, let it all go. And you can breathe out through your nose or through your mouth, but just release all of the air out. Once you've released all of that exhale, plug your left nostril and breathe in only through the right side. Take in as much oxygen as you can through that right side. At the top of the inhale, switch. Exhale through the left side. Let it release nice and slowly and gently. Good. We'll breathe back in through the left side. Again, drink in as much air as you can. Feel that nourishment. Once your lungs have fully expanded there at the top of the inhale, switch. Exhale through the right side. Inhale through the right side. Feel that flow of life and energy and nourishment. Switch. Exhale through the left side. Feel that healthy release, whatever the body no longer needs. Inhale left. Switch. Exhale right. Inhale right. Switch. Exhale left. Inhale left. Switch. Exhale right. Try one more full round. Inhale right. Switch. Exhale left. Inhale left. Switch. Exhale right. Once you've released all of the air out, you can relax your hands to your lap or wherever feels most grounding. Just come back to a normal way of breathing for a moment. Allow yourself to just notice what's occurring, and sometimes it might feel a little bit like a swirling of energy and then a settling. So stay here as long as you need to just follow the process of what's occurring in your body and mind. And whenever you're ready, Alan, you can share with us how you feel.
Well, the first thing I noticed is my left nostril is definitely a little more stuffy than my right one. I don't know if you guys...
that's normal to notice.
Yeah,
No
I don't know if you
worries.
guys could hear that or not. I apologize if you did. But definitely a sense of calm. I definitely keyed into it really quickly. I
Good.
felt like the first couple breaths, it was like, wait, am I doing this right? Did a great job leading through that, obviously. And once I finally got keyed into it, it was definitely a sense of calm pretty quickly. That was kind of the second thing that I noticed, which was really nice. I did feel, I guess if there was a third thing, I did feel like my breaths got almost instantly deeper, whereas the first couple might have been a little bit more shallow. I felt like I was able to get way more breath in, even just a couple of breaths in, which was really nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Felt good.
Yeah, those are amazing things to notice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I'm glad that you were able to have that experience, even just with the few rounds that we were able to do today. So that's awesome.
How long would you suggest somebody does this? Was that enough for folks, or was that just like a taste test?
Good question. I think, first of all, it's important for people to meet themselves where they are. So if like one round is all that they have available right now, then one round of breath work is better than no breath work. But ideally, I would say aiming for around 2 to 3 minutes as an entry point would be most ideal to really connect to the breath and be able to experience fully what it's going to do to your body, your mind, and your heart.
Gotcha.
And then to really receive those full benefits. And then as you get more familiar with the breathing techniques and get to know them, kind of like they're your companions. And, we just like we use different friends for different things in our life, or don't use them in terms of like taking advantage of. But, we might be drawn towards certain people for certain reasons. We might be drawn towards our breath for certain reasons as well.
Sure.
And we'll have that awareness of maybe I should do 2 minutes of alternate nostril breathing to start my day right now because I'm feeling a little off-centered, or maybe I should do just 30 seconds of breath of fire because I just need a really quick pick-me-up. That kind of thing. As we become more familiar, we'll be able to better know ourselves, how long to do them and how often to utilize them. But I would say, just generally speaking, as an entry point, a couple of minutes is enough to get to know the breath and be able to really receive some benefits.
Good. Well, thanks for leading through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of brings me to my last point for listeners is, other than maybe doing that practice, if they did it along with us, alternate nose breathing, what else can the listeners do today around this whole idea of breath work and anxiety and the umbrella of everything that could come with that?
Right, absolutely. Well, thankfully, there are so many great free resources out there now that people can pursue if they're wanting to really dive in. We
Sure.
do have like our Connect classes and some certain breathing techniques on Skyterra at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that exploring that would be a great doorway for people to get to know some of the breathing techniques in a really natural way. If you just choose a different video a day for a week, then you're going to get to learn several different breathing techniques. So that would be one option.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there are so many great apps now. Like I use Insight Timer sometimes for meditation and breath work, but I know there are a lot of others like Breathe and Calm that have meditations that incorporate breath work. And I think most of them will have like a search feature where if you wanted to just search for breath or Google different breathing techniques and then search for certain breathing techniques to get to learn those
Sure.
specifically,
Yep.
I would think most likely certain things will come up on those apps that could also be a good way for you to get to know several different breathing techniques in a way that feels safe and guided.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube is also a good option.
Of course.
YouTube has a lot of good breathing techniques. I think that doing like a quick little background check on whoever it is that you're doing a video with can be helpful, like in terms of looking at their other content and some of the comments and that kind of thing, just to make sure they are well versed in the field. But you'll also probably be able to experience that yourself just by using your own judgment and how you feel through doing the video and through their energy.
Yep.
So I think that all those free resources can be really great to utilize. But I think it's also important to, like I said, meet people where they are and for people to meet themselves where they are. So if it feels overwhelming to learn all of these breathing techniques right away and try to get to know how to use them, like just pick one to work with for however long you need to. Stay with that one breathing technique. And then once you feel like you have a good understanding of it or a good connection to it and how to utilize it in your life, then you can expand your library of breathing techniques and go to the next one. So I think it's important to know like what works for you in terms of a learning environment. On the other side, if you tend to get bored sticking to one thing repetitively, then it may be more helpful for that type of person to do a variety and maybe every day of the week choose a different video, like I said previously, or to try to choose all the different breathing techniques over an extended amount of time, like maybe do a 30-day breathing challenge yourself or
Sure.
something so that you're keeping it interesting. So all of that is to just say, I think finding what works for you is what's most important. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that answer can be kind of vague, but I think it's so important with anything that you want to pursue with consistency and with depth.
Awesome. And of course, they can come see you here at Skyterra.
Of course, that would be
Yeah.
the best option. We'd love for people to come here. And like I said, it's such an honor and a gift to be able to share these tools because of how life-changing they have been for me personally, but also really through what I've witnessed in other people's lives and through what they've shared. So if people would like to come see us here at Skyterra, we would all welcome them with open arms, and you would have a really safe space to get to explore all of these breathing techniques in the classes or one-on-one.
Sure. Did we miss anything?
I'm sure there's always more that can be discussed and shared and explored when it comes to such a powerful topic like the breath. I think that in terms of a foundation, I think we laid a decent foundation
For
for
sure.
people, for them to now hopefully be able to choose the next step that feels right to them. But we're also happy to support anyone if they have any questions or, again, if they want more support, they can come see us here or reach out, and we'd be happy to talk more about breath work on another podcast and cover a different topic more in depth.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on. If you have questions, listeners, you can always reach us at inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. So, Claire, thank you so much for coming on. It was an awesome first podcast for you. I'm sure we'll have you back on again here soon.
Thank you, Alan. It was a pleasure for me, and I had so much fun getting to envision the listeners on the other side of this conversation, and I'm grateful that you guys stuck around to the end if you're still listening. So thank you, everyone.
Good stuff. Well, listeners, we'll catch you next Monday.
The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.